Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Museum's 2020 Hanukkah celebrations. My name is Frances Jeans, and I'm the Interim Director here at the Jewish Museum London. This year has been an extraordinary time for us all, and one of the ways we have persevered is by coming together and working together. With this in mind, the museum has invited 8 community guests to partner up with us to create 8 digital nights of Hanukkah, which aim to connect the community to our collection here at the museum, which cares for the collective heritage and history of the community. We have chosen 8 Hanukah lamps from our collection and matched them up with 8 partner organisations based on the themes found within each unique artefact. Every night of Hanukkah, a different partner will share their Hanukkah message with you by illuminating us on how the lamp from our collections resonates with their community organisation, their experiences of this year, and their hopes for the next. Tonight is the 6th night of Hanukkah, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's Hanukkah lighting message from Rabbi Major Reuben Livingstone, the Senior Jewish Chaplain to HM Armed Forces, who has been matched with our shell case Hanukkah lamp.
I am Rabbi Reuben Livingstone, the Jewish Chaplain to the Armed Forces, and I'm also a serving chaplain in the British Army. I want to talk about the use of a shell case as a menorah, because that's the graphic that this video is based upon. And actually a shell case is a very appropriate item to form a Hanukah, because there is a strange synergy between the festival of Hanukkah and warfare. So this particular menorah is not only pragmatic, made likely in the trenches during wartime, but it is also very symbolic and very poetic. Let's reflect back. By the time the Talmud had codified the festival of Hanukkah as we know it, the significant military dimension of the Maccabean triumph had frankly become an embarrassment. The revised and suitably sanitized version of the events focuses almost entirely on the miracle of the flask of oil, which symbolizes in a far more benign way Israel's miraculous survival against the odds, and with it the enduring reliability of God's covenant. Notwithstanding this apparent rabbinic disapproval of warfare, it is fair to say that while the Torah does not glamorize violence, it is allowed as a pragmatic means to a necessary end. Biblical Judaism plainly recognizes both, quotes, a time for war and a time for peace. And that's Ecclesiastes 3. What requires clarification is how the sages themselves resolve the conflicting values of war and peace. Any such discussion ought to begin with the premium placed on avoiding conflict in Judaism. According to numerous rabbinic sources, peace, shalom, is Judaism's highest aspiration. Indeed, the Talmud asserts that the entire Torah is really based on the value of shalom. The Midrash explains that the obligation to seek peace is of a higher order than ritual observances, because most of the Torah's commandments are conditional upon specific contexts and conditions, whilst the imperative of peace is really universal, ongoing, and overarching. As the verse declares, Bakesh shalom b'rodfehu, search for peace always and pursue it. That's Psalms 34. For this reason, according to the halakha, in order to maintain peace, one is actually permitted to compromise certain other moral and religious values and principles, because it's a higher goal. So clearly, peace is a paramount value in Judaism. But how do we apply this in the face of aggression? Some argue that pacifism is an appropriate response to aggression, as can be seen in the Talmudic narratives of Jewish martyrdom, the story of Mitzada, etc., etc. In mainstream Jewish rabbinic tradition, in fact, self-defense is clearly a moral and legal obligation. The Torah allows defense of property, even if this will cause bloodshed. The rabbis explain that without the ability to use lethal force to stop aggression, anarchy and oppression would reign. For this reason, the consensus Jewish tradition considers pacifism in the face of violence actually to be immoral. Refusing to resist evil effectively to be party to it. Thus, while peace may be Judaism's paramount value, at times we must make war. Perhaps the pivotal point is that this does not permit ignoring the humanity of our enemies. The Talmud teaches that when the Egyptian army drowned in the Red Sea, God said to the celestial angels, "My creatures are drowning in the sea, and you sing celestial songs, heavenly songs." But none of this quite explains the editing of the Hanukah story. Perhaps given the terrible ravages of war and rebellion on the Jews of Roman Judea, the Palestinian rabbis sought to emphasize a very different life vision. Equally, the Babylonian Talmudic sages, who were spared the turmoil of the Holy Land and enjoyed the protection of the Sassanid Persian Empire, will themselves have been extremely reticent to lionize or even focus on the Hasmonean military revolt. And thus rabbinic concerns that the amplification of the original Hanukah narrative might threaten Jewish spiritual equilibrium, sort of tilt Judaism in the wrong direction, cannot be discounted. But once reconstructed around the spiritual theme of the miraculous survival of godly light, this Chag could preserve its essence whilst being neutered of all the other martial connotations. All this allows us, through the prism of hindsight, to take a newfound pride in the Maccabees and their central role in Jewish history. It should also lead us to appreciate the gallant yet often unsung contribution of the Jewish warrior from antiquity to our age. And therefore, we come back full circle to gaze upon a shell case made into a menorah. Unlikely combination, but really not unfeasible or unlikely at all, because here we see a marriage of the earliest origins of Hanukah. Victory, military victory indeed, of a guerrilla campaign, together with the prized rabbinic metaphor of light, and the fact that our light as a nation refused to be snuffed out and continued to, despite the odds, to burn bright.